The old woman spent her days watching the rain, until the orange cat brought her a message from the past. The old house sighed around Eleanor, a chorus of creaks and groans that echoed the weariness in her own bones. It was a house steeped in memories, a repository of a life lived, a love lost. Situated on the outskirts of Havenwood, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia, the house had once been vibrant with laughter and the scent of honeysuckle. Now, it was shrouded in a quiet melancholy, a reflection of the woman who dwelled within its weathered walls. Eleanor sat by the window, her usual post, her gaze fixed on the rain. It had been raining for days, a steady, relentless downpour that blurred the edges of the world and mirrored the grayness of her heart. She was an old woman now, 80 years past, her body frail, her movements slow and deliberate. Her hair, once the color of autumn leaves, was now a thin, silvery white, pulled back in a loose bun. Her eyes, a faded blue, held a deep, abiding sadness, a reflection of a grief that had become a constant companion. Every day was the same. She'd wake, dress slowly, make a pot of weak tea, and then settle into her armchair by the window. She'd watch the rain, her mind drifting back to a time when her life was full, when her heart was whole. She'd remember James, her husband, her love, her life. James had been a soldier, a proud, strong man with a gentle heart and a smile that could light up a room. He had gone to Vietnam in 1967, a young man full of hope and patriotism, promising to return her to their life together. He had never come back. For years, she had waited, clinging to the hope that he was still alive, that he would somehow find his way home. She had written letters, made inquiries, searched tirelessly for any information, any clue. But the years had passed, and the hope had dwindled, replaced by a gnawing emptiness, a profound sense of loss that had settled deep within her soul. The house was filled with his presence, with the echoes of their life together. In the living room, a faded photograph on the mantelpiece showed them young and smiling, their arms intertwined, their eyes filled with dreams. On the bookshelf, a worn leather-bound volume of poetry held his handwritten notes in the margins, his thoughts and feelings preserved in ink. In the hallway, his old military cap hung on a hook, a silent reminder of his service, his sacrifice. And then there was the orange cat. He had appeared one day, several years ago, a skinny, bedraggled creature seeking shelter from storm. He was a common-looking cat, his fur a faded, rusty orange, his eyes a pale, almost translucent amber. He was wary, aloof, keeping his distance. Eleanor had left out a saucer of milk, a gesture of kindness, but she hadn't expected him to stay. But he had stayed. He'd become a regular visitor, appearing each morning, rain or shine, sitting on the porch or curled up beneath the bougainvillea bushes that grew in wild profusion around the house. He was a silent presence, a watchful observer, a creature of habit and routine. Eleanor had grown accustomed to his presence, but she hadn't formed a real connection with him. She was too lost in her grief, too consumed by her memories, to fully engage with the world around her. She'd acknowledge him with a nod, a soft word, but she rarely touched him. He was simply there, a part of the landscape, a silent witness to her solitary existence. As the rain continued to fall, drumming against the window panes, Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. It was a sound that always brought James to mind. He had loved the rain. He'd said it cleansed the world, washed away the dust and grime, leaving everything fresh and new. He'd promised her they'd dance in the rain when he got back. A tear traced a path down Eleanor's wrinkled cheek. She brushed it away impatiently, a familiar gesture. She wouldn't cry. She had cried enough tears to fill an ocean. Now, there was only emptiness, a quiet ache that never truly left her. The rain continued its relentless drumming, a soundtrack to her sorrow, a constant reminder of the love she had lost, the life she had left behind. The orange cat, a silent observer, sat nearby, his presence a small, almost unnoticed comfort in the vast emptiness of the old house. The day, like so many before it, stretched out before her, a gray expanse of time to be endured, not lived. The rain finally subsided, giving way to a weak, watery sunlight that filtered through the clouds. Eleanor remained in her chair, her gaze fixed on the dripping leaves of the bougainvillea outside her window. The silence of the house, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, pressed in on her, heavy and suffocating. She heard a soft thump on the porch, followed by a faint scratching sound. Rusty. He was back. She hadn't seen him all morning, which was unusual. He typically stayed close to the house, especially when it was raining. She rose slowly, her joints protesting, and went to the door. She opened it cautiously, peering out into the damp, gray morning. Rusty was sitting on the porch, his orange fur damp and slightly matted. He looked up at her, his amber eyes holding a strange intensity, a look that was both familiar and unsettling. And in his mouth, he held something. It was a piece of cloth, small and square, its edges frayed and tattered. It was wet and muddy, almost unrecognizable. But as Rusty dropped it at her feet, Eleanor saw a flash of color, a glimpse of a pattern that sent a jolt of recognition through her. She bent down, her movements slow and painful, and picked up the object. It was a handkerchief, an old, faded handkerchief, made of linen, with a delicate embroidered border. And in one corner, almost obscured by mud and grime, were a few embroidered words, barely legible. "I will always come back to you, 1967. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She recognized it instantly. It was his handkerchief, the one she had embroidered for James, a gift she had given him just before he left for Vietnam. She clutched the handkerchief to her chest, her hand trembling. The fabric was cold and damp against her skin, but it felt like a lifeline, a tangible connection to a past she had thought lost forever. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and heavy, blurring her vision. She hadn't cried in years, not like this. The grief had been a constant companion, a dull ache that never truly left her. But this was different. This was a surge of emotion, a wave of pain and longing so intense it almost overwhelmed her. She sank back into her armchair, the handkerchief clutched in her hand, her mind racing. Where had Rusty found it? How had it survived all these years? What did it mean? She examined the handkerchief more closely, carefully wiping away the mud and grime. The embroidered words, though faded, were still legible, a testament to her careful stitches, to the love and hope she had poured into every thread. "I will always come back to you, 1967, the year James had gone to war, the year he had disappeared, the year her life had changed forever." The handkerchief was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a message, a sign, a tangible link to her lost love. It was a promise, broken by the cruel realities of war, but still echoing across the years. She looked at Rusty, who was now sitting at her feet, watching her with his usual unblinking gaze. He seemed different, somehow, less aloof, less detached. He seemed to be waiting, expectant, as if he knew the significance of his discovery. Eleanor began to pay closer attention to the cat. She noticed his routine, his habits, the subtle nuances of his behavior. She realized that he always disappeared every morning, regardless of the weather, and he always returned when it started to rain, as if seeking shelter, or perhaps seeking her. She also noticed that he didn't eat the food she left out for him in a bowl, the dry kibble she bought at the local store. He'd sniff at it, then turn away, his expression disdainful. But when she offered him scraps of meat or fish, leftovers from her own meager meals, he'd eat them with relish, purring softly. It was as if he were accustomed to a different kind of food, a more human diet. And then there was the bougainvillea. She noticed that Rusty always curled up under the same bush, the one closest to the window where she spent most of her days. It was the same bush where she and James used to sit, in the evenings sharing stories, making plans, dreaming of their future. These observations, small and seemingly insignificant, began to weave a tapestry of suspicion, of hope, of a growing belief that Rusty was more than just a stray cat. He was a connection, a messenger, a guide to a past she had thought lost forever. And she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she had to follow him. She had to find out where he went every morning, what secrets he held, what message he was trying to convey. The handkerchief was just the beginning. She had a feeling, a deep, intuitive feeling, that there was more to discover. And she was ready, finally, to face whatever the past might hold. The decision to follow Rusty was not made lightly. Eleanor was an old woman, frail and unsteady on her feet. She hadn't ventured far from her house in years, her world shrinking to the confines of her rooms, her memories her only companions. The thought of navigating the overgrown path behind her house, of venturing into the unknown, was daunting, almost terrifying. But the handkerchief, the tangible proof of James's existence, the subtle clues in Rusty's behavior, had ignited a spark within her, a flicker of determination that had been dormant for far too long. She had to know. She had to find out where Rusty went, what secrets he held, what message he was trying to convey. She spent several days preparing, both mentally and physically. She practiced walking around her house, building up her strength and endurance. She gathered supplies, a sturdy walking stick, a small bottle of water, a flashlight, and a pair of old gardening gloves. She even packed a small bag with a few crackers and a piece of cheese in case she got hungry. She chose a day when the weather was mild, the sun shining weakly through the clouds. She dressed in layers, choosing comfortable, practical clothing, a thick sweater, a warm jacket, and a pair of sturdy shoes. She felt a strange mixture of apprehension and excitement, a sense of embarking on an adventure, a journey into the unknown. She waited patiently for Rusty's morning departure. As usual, he appeared on the porch shortly after sunrise, accepting her offering of a small piece of cooked chicken with a quiet dignity. He ate it slowly, deliberately, then licked his paws, his amber eyes fixed on Eleanor, as if sensing her anticipation. Then, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the house. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding in her chest, her steps slow and unsteady. She gripped the walking stick tightly, using it for support as she navigated the uneven ground. The small path behind the house was more overgrown than she remembered. Weeds and brambles had encroached, obscuring the once familiar route. The air was damp and cool, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. Rusty moved ahead of her, a flash of orange fur against the green and brown of the undergrowth. He didn't run. He walked at a steady pace, occasionally looking back, as if to make sure she was following. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, his movements purposeful and deliberate. Eleanor struggled to keep up. Her legs ached, her breath came in short, ragged gasps. She had to stop frequently, leaning on her stick, catching her breath, gathering her strength. But she persisted, driven by a force she couldn't explain, a deep, intuitive feeling that she was on the right path, that she was getting closer to the truth. As she walked, she began to notice details she had never noticed before. A faded, almost illegible sign nailed to a tree, its words obscured by moss and lichen. U.S. Army Restricted Area. A rusted piece of metal, half buried in the undergrowth, perhaps a remnant of some long-forgotten machinery. A crumbling stone foundation, almost completely hidden by a tangle of vines, the only evidence of a building that had once stood there. These were remnants of the old wartime supply station, a place she had vaguely heard about, but had never seen. It had been abandoned long ago, after the war, left to decay and be reclaimed by nature. It was a place of ghosts, of forgotten memories, of a past that was both distant and intimately connected to her own. The path began to slope downward, leading into a small, overgrown hollow. The trees grew thicker here, their branches intertwined, casting long, dark shadows across the ground. The air was cooler, damper, and the silence was more profound, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. Rusty paused at the edge of the hollow, looking back at Eleanor, his eyes gleaming in the dappled sunlight. He seemed to be waiting for her, encouraging her to continue. Eleanor took a deep breath and followed him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She descended into the hollow, the ground uneven and treacherous beneath her feet. She could feel the dampness seeping through her shoes, the chill of the air raising goosebumps on her arms. And then she saw it, a small hole, almost completely hidden by a low-hanging branch of a scraggly pine tree. It was dark and narrow, barely large enough for Rusty to squeeze through. But it was there, a hidden entrance to a secret world, a place where the past lay buried, waiting to be unearthed. Rusty disappeared into the hole, vanishing into the darkness. Eleanor hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the rough bark of the tree. She was afraid, terrified of what she might find. But she knew she couldn't turn back. She had come this far. She had to see it through. She had to know the truth. The cat, her silent guide, her unexpected messenger, had led her to this place. And now, it was up to her to uncover the secrets that lay hidden within. Eleanor knelt down, her old bones protesting with a chorus of creaks and groans. The ground was damp and cold beneath her knees, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. She peered into the hole, her eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. She could see nothing but darkness, a void that seemed to swallow the light and amplify the silence. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the entrance. Fear, cold and clammy, gripped her heart. What if she found something she couldn't bear to see? What if the truth was more painful than the uncertainty she had lived with for so long? But then she thought of James. She thought of his smile, his laughter, his unwavering love. She thought of the promise he had made, the promise embroidered on the handkerchief. I will always come back to you. She had to know. She had to find out what had happened to him, what secrets this hidden place held. She owed it to him, to herself, to the memory of their love. She reached for the small flashlight she had brought, her fingers fumbling with the switch. A narrow beam of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the interior of the hole. It was larger than she had initially thought, more like a small, collapsed burrow or den than a simple hole. And it wasn't empty. She could see something glinting in the light, something metallic, partially buried in the loose soil. She reached in, her hand trembling, and pulled it out. It was a button, a rusty, tarnished button, but unmistakably a military button, with the faint imprint of an eagle still visible on its surface. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. It was his button, a button from his uniform. She recognized it instantly, even after all these years. She felt a wave of dizziness, a surge of grief so intense it almost overwhelmed her. She clutched the button to her chest, her body shaking with sobs. But she couldn't stop now. She had to see it through. She had to find the rest. She shone the flashlight back into the hole, illuminating more of the interior. She saw something else, a larger object, also partially buried. She reached in again, her fingers digging into the damp earth, pulling and tugging until the object came loose. It was an aluminum plate, rectangular in shape, with rounded corners. It was covered in mud and grime, but as she wiped it clean with the hem of her jacket, she saw the faint engraving, a series of numbers, a military identification number. James's number. She knew it by heart. She had memorized it, repeated it over and over again, like a mantra during those long, agonizing years of waiting, of searching, of hoping against hope. She traced the numbers with her fingertip, her touch gentle, reverent. It was a tangible connection to him, a proof of his existence, a confirmation of her worst fears. And then she saw it, the final piece of the puzzle, a small, dark shape, partially obscured by a tangle of roots. She reached in, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. It was a letter, or rather, what was left of a letter, It was half-torn, water-damaged, and almost illegible. But it was there, a fragile remnant of a message sent but never received. Eleanor carefully unfolded the letter, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it. The paper was brittle and fragile, threatening to crumble at her touch. The ink was faded, blurred by moisture and time, but she could make out a few words, a few phrases, enough to understand the gist of the message. It was from James. "My dearest Eleanor," he had written. "The fighting is fiercimus uter ribladream offo mepermiscum, back love you always." The rest was lost. She couldn't tell the context. Why was it there? Was it something he buried himself? Eleanor collapsed onto the damp ground, her body racked with sobs. The grief, held at bay for so many years, crashed over her like a tidal wave, engulfing her in its raw, unyielding power. She wept for James, for his lost life, for the dreams they had shared, for the future they had never had. She wept for the young man who had gone to war, full of hope and patriotism, and had never returned. She wept for the years of uncertainty, the endless searching, the gnawing emptiness that had consumed her. But amidst the grief, there was also a sense of relief. A strange, unexpected calm. She had found him. Not in the way she had hoped, not in the way she had dreamed, but she had found him. She knew now what had happened. She had a place, a tangible place, where she could mourn him, where she could remember him, where she could finally say goodbye. The mystery was solved. The cat, Rusty, her faithful companion, her silent guide, had led her to this place, to this truth. He had, in his own inexplicable way, brought her closure, brought her peace. How? Why? It was just some animal instinct or something beyond. She looked up, searching for the orange cat. He was sitting a few feet away, watching her, his amber eyes filled with a deep, knowing sadness. He seemed to understand, to share her grief, to offer his silent comfort. Eleanor rose slowly, painfully, her body aching, her heart heavy. She gathered the button, the plate, and the fragment of the letter, holding them close to her chest like precious relics. These were the remnants of James's life, the tangible proof of his existence, the final message from her beloved husband. She would bring them home. She would keep them safe. She would honor his memory. And she would never forget the orange cat, the silent messenger, who had led her to this place, who had brought her the closure she had sought for so long. The rain had stopped. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the small, overgrown hollow, a silent benediction on a love that had endured, a life that had been lost, and a secret that had finally been revealed. The discovery of James's belongings, though profoundly painful, brought a strange sense of calm to Eleanor. The decades of uncertainty, the gnawing questions, the endless what-ifs, had finally been laid to rest. She had an answer, however tragic. She knew, now, that a part of him had remained close, hidden in the forgotten corner of the world they had once shared. Returning home, with Rusty trotting faithfully by her side, felt different. The house, once a repository of painful memories, now held a sense of completion. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was filled with the echoes of a love story, a life story that had finally found its ending. Eleanor carefully cleaned the recovered items. The button, once rusty, gleamed faintly after she polished it with a soft cloth. The aluminum plate, though scratched and dented, revealed the engraved numbers clearly under the light. And the fragment of the letter, fragile and torn, she placed in a protective plastic sleeve, a precious relic of a lost love. She arranged them on the small table beside her armchair, next to the worn leather shoes. They formed a small, poignant shrine, a testament to James's life, his sacrifice, and his enduring love. But one question still lingered, a nagging mystery that tugged at Eleanor's mind. How had Rusty known? How had a stray cat, who had appeared years after James's disappearance, found these buried objects that had remained hidden for almost half a century? It was a question that defied logic that challenged the boundaries of rational explanation. Was it simply chance? A random act of feline curiosity? Or was there something more? Something deeper? Something inexplainable? Eleanor began to observe Rusty more closely, studying his habits, his movements, his interactions with the world around him. She noticed subtle details she had previously overlooked. She realized that Rusty's morning disappearances were not random wanderings. He always followed the same route, the same path that led to the old supply station. He always returned when it started to rain, as if seeking shelter, or perhaps seeking her. She also noticed that Rusty, despite his aloofness with most people, seemed to have a particular affinity for veterans. He'd often sit beside them on the benches outside the local VFW hall, allowing them to stroke his fur, purring softly. He seemed to sense their pain, their loss, their unspoken memories. One afternoon, Eleanor decided to seek some answers. She contacted the local historical society, hoping to learn more about the old supply station and its connection to the Vietnam War. She spoke with Mr. Harrison, a local historian, a kind, elderly man with a wealth of knowledge about the area's past. He remembered the supply station, though it had been abandoned and largely forgotten for decades. It was a small operation, he explained, used mostly for storing equipment and supplies. There were rumors, of course, during the war. Stories of soldiers going missing in the area, never accounted for. But nothing was ever confirmed. It was a chaotic time. A lot of things got lost in the shuffle. He paused, then added, "There was one story, though, about a young soldier, a local boy, who disappeared near the station. He was declared missing in action, but his body was never recovered. His name was James. James Thompson, I believe." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. James Thompson. It was the same last name she and James briefly used in their marriage. Did he have a cat?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Harrison looked confused and searched the record, said, "I'm sorry. There's not clear record about that." Eleanor asked for more details and got the confirmation. The missing solitaire was indeed her husband. Eleanor thanked Mr. Harrison, her mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, forming a picture that was both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. She realized that Rusty wasn't just a stray. He was, in some inexplicable way, connected to James. Perhaps he had been a kitten, a stray that James had befriended at the supply station. Perhaps James had even brought him home briefly. Perhaps Rusty remembered. The idea that a cat may carry memories seems unbelievable. Eleanor decided to keep the theory to herself. That evening, Eleanor sat in her armchair, Rusty curled up at her feet. She looked at the cat, at his faded orange fur, his amber eyes, his quiet dignity. She stroked his fur, feeling the warmth of his body beneath her hand. "You knew, didn't you, old friend?" she whispered. "You knew all along." Rusty purred, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the quiet room. He looked up at Eleanor, his gaze steady and knowing. He couldn't speak, he couldn't explain, but he could offer his presence, his comfort, his unwavering loyalty. Eleanor had found closure, a painful but necessary ending to a story that had haunted her for decades. And she had found it through the most unexpected of messengers, a small, orange cat who had carried a secret, a memory, a love, across the years. She decided to create a small memorial for James, a place where she could honor his memory and find some measure of peace. It wouldn't be a grand monument, just a simple stone marker, placed in the hollow where she had found his belongings, a quiet tribute to a life lost too soon. And Rusty, her faithful companion, would be there beside her, a silent witness to her grief, her love, and her enduring hope. Time, as it always does, began to soften the sharp edges of Eleanor's grief. The discovery of James's belongings, the creation of the small memorial, had brought a sense of closure, a quiet acceptance that had eluded her for so long. The rain, once a symbol of her sorrow, now seemed to cleanse and renew, washing away the dust of the past and allowing new life to emerge. Eleanor's relationship with Rusty deepened, evolving into a true companionship. He was no longer just a visitor, a silent presence in her home. He was her friend, her confidant, her furry guardian. He slept on her bed, curled up at her feet, his purr a constant, soothing rhythm that filled the silence of the house. He followed her from room to room, his amber eyes watching her with a knowing gaze, his presence a comforting reassurance. She started to talk to him, sharing her thoughts, her memories, her feelings. She'd tell him stories about James, about their life together, about the dreams they had shared. She'd read to him from James's old poetry book, her voice soft and gentle, the words filling the room with a bittersweet nostalgia. And Rusty, in his own quiet way, listened. He'd rub against her legs, purr loudly, and occasionally, he'd reach out a paw and gently touch her hand, as if offering his support, his understanding, his unwavering love. Eleanor also began to venture outside more often. She'd sit on the porch, in the sunshine, watching the birds and the butterflies, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. She'd tend to the bougainvillea bushes, pruning the overgrown branches, nurturing the vibrant blooms. She'd even started to take short walks, slowly and carefully, with Rusty by her side, exploring the familiar landscape with new eyes. The small memorial she had created for James, in the hollow behind the house, became a place of pilgrimage, a sanctuary of peace and remembrance. She'd visit it every day, bringing fresh flowers, cleaning the stone marker, and simply sitting there in silence, feeling his presence, remembering his love. She also started to engage with the world beyond her home. She joined the local historical society, sharing her story with Mr. Harrison and the other members. She volunteered at the Veterans Organization, offering comfort and support to other families who had lost loved ones in war. She found a sense of purpose, a renewed sense of belonging, a connection to a community that understood her pain and shared her grief. The rainy days no longer held the same power over her. She still remembered James, of course, she always would. But the memories were no longer tinged with the same overwhelming sadness, the same crushing despair. They were now tempered with a quiet acceptance, a gentle gratitude for the love they had shared, the life they had built together. The final scene takes place on a bright, sunny afternoon, several months after the discovery of the handkerchief. Eleanor is sitting outside, not by the window watching the rain, but on a small bench she had placed near James's memorial. The bougainvillea is in full bloom, a riot of vibrant color that fills the air with its sweet fragrance. Rusty is curled up beside her, his orange fur gleaming in the sunlight. He's purring contentedly, his eyes half closed, his body relaxed and at peace. Eleanor is smiling, genuine, heartfelt smile that reaches her eyes. She's no longer the frail, withdrawn woman she once was. She's still old, her body still bears the marks of time, but there's a new strength in her posture, a new light in her eyes. She's wearing a small, silver locket around her neck, a gift she had given James many years ago. Inside, she has placed a tiny fragment of the handkerchief, the embroidered words, "I will always come back to you," a constant reminder of his love, his promise, and the unexpected way in which he had, indeed, returned. She looks at Rusty, her faithful companion, her silent messenger, her furry angel. She strokes his fur, feeling the warmth of his body beneath her hand. "Thank you, old friend," she whispers. "Thank you for bringing him home." Rusty looks up at her, his amber eyes filled with a knowing wisdom. He purrs, a low, rumbling sound that vibrates through the quiet afternoon. He cannot speak. He cannot explain the mysteries of his connection to James, to the past. But he doesn't need to. His presence, his loyalty, his unwavering love speaks volumes. Eleanor leans back against the bench, closing her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She's at peace. She's found closure. She's found a new purpose. She's found a love that endures, a connection that transcends time and loss. And she knows, with a certainty that defies logic, that even though James is gone, he is not forgotten. He lives on, in her memories, in her heart, and in the gentle purr of an orange cat who brought her a message from the past. a message of hope, of healing, and of everlasting love. The rain may still fall, but now she sees the sunshine beyond it, a future filled with a quiet joy, a newfound purpose, and the enduring companionship of a furry friend who showed her that love, in its most unexpected forms, always finds a way. The small memorial became a point of interest in Havenwood. People, touched by Eleanor's story, would occasionally leave flowers or small stones, tokens of respect and remembrance. The local newspaper even ran a short piece about the miracle cat and the rediscovered love story, further cementing Rusty's legendary status in the community. Eleanor, initially hesitant about the attention, eventually embraced it, realizing that sharing her story helped others to connect with their own losses and find solace in the enduring power of love. She started receiving letters from people all over the country, sharing their own stories of lost loved ones, of unexpected reunions, of the mysterious ways animals had touched their lives. She responded to each letter personally, her handwriting a little shaky but filled with warmth and empathy. She found a new purpose in connecting with others, in offering comfort and support, in sharing the wisdom she had gained through her own journey of grief and healing. Rusty, oblivious to his fame, continued his quiet routine, dividing his time between Eleanor's house and his explorations of the surrounding woods. He remained her constant companion, her silent confidant, her furry reminder of the enduring bonds of love. He'd often sit beside her as she wrote her letters, his purr a gentle counterpoint to the scratching of her pen, his presence a comforting reassurance. One warm evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Eleanor sat on her porch, a light shawl draped around her shoulders. Rusty was curled up at her feet, his body a warm, comforting weight. She was no longer watching the rain. She was watching the sunset, appreciating the beauty of the world around her, the simple joys of life that she had once been too consumed by grief to notice. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. She had come full circle. She had faced the darkness, unearthed the secrets of the past, and found her way back to the light. She had found peace, not in forgetting, but in remembering, in honoring the love she had shared with James, and in embracing the unexpected gifts that life had brought her, including the unwavering companionship of a small, orange cat who had changed her life forever. The old house, once filled with shadows and silence, now echoed with a quiet joy, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of love, and the mysterious ways in which connections can be forged, broken, and ultimately restored. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor knew that even though some loves are lost to time, their echoes remain, carried on the wind, whispered in the rain, and purred softly by a faithful friend.